For those of you who don't know me, I'm Francisco Rivera. I'm the founding director of the International Human Rights Clinic here at Santa Clara. And I also run our Costa Rica and Geneva summer abroad programs. If you have any questions about those, you can ask me as well. I view social justice, or more broadly speaking, human rights work, as really my life's calling. It really is. When I went to college in 1994, I read a book called The Massacres at El Mozote. It was written by a New York Times author, and the book described horrendous human rights violations by paramilitaries, during the civil war in El Salvador. And I honestly had no idea that such atrocities, were so commonplace, throughout the world. So I started reading a little bit more about it. And I always say that it opened my eyes in a way that I could just never close them again. I don't know why, I just cannot close my eyes to that injustice. After college, I went back to Puerto Rico. I'm from Puerto Rico. In 1998, I became executive director of Amnesty International, but in Puerto Rico. That's where I learned, the importance of, on the one hand, raising awareness about human rights violations, but I also learned things that really helped me in my legal career, which is documenting and fact-finding and the importance of that, right? In law school, they often give you the facts, but trying to figure out what those facts are, really great and important skills to have as a law professional. I also learned of the power of what we call in the human rights world, naming and shaming, right? Which I always say, a government has to have the capability of being shamed in order for that strategy to work, and not all governments have the capability of being shamed. I learned the value of that, but I also saw its limitations, That's why I decided to go to law school. I saw it as a means to an end, right? I needed more tools in my toolbox to be a more effective human rights defender. And at that time, I went to American University in Washington, D.C. And at that time, the dean of the law school, Claudio Grossman, he was also the president of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is a human rights body that's in Washington, D.C. That's part of the Organization of American States. Anyway, the point is that he asked me if I wanted to assist him in a case involving the torture and disappearance of a Guatemalan husband of a U.S. Harvard Law graduate. Her name is Jennifer Harbury. Google her if you want to be inspired on how to do legal work, for those who most need it. In any case, I accompanied the dean to Costa Rica for a hearing before something called the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which is there in Costa Rica. And I went to the hearing, and I was so moved, by the case and just by the power of the court, and it just, I felt like that's what I wanted to do. So much so that when I graduated from law school in Washington, D.C., I got in my car and I literally drove all the way to Costa Rica, hoping to get a job at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Now, the court did not have a job opening at that time, but that's when you have to figure out, how to make yourself heard and be indispensable to an organization. And I realized that the court didn't have an internship program, an official one. So I told them, I'll create one for you. And you know what? I was my own first intern. So I supervised internships and visiting professionals. And, eventually I got hired as a junior attorney and then as a senior attorney, which meant that I got to draft judgments in cases involving human rights violations throughout all of the Americas. Although I found that, the drafting of judgments and working in a human rights tribunal very satisfying professionally. I also have always felt a passion for public speaking, for teaching, for being with human rights victims, for representing human rights victims, for addressing human rights violations and not just, drafting judgments. So I thought about, what would be the best way for me to combine all those passions. And I was able to do that by creating the Human Rights Clinic here at Santa Clara Law School. Here at the clinic, I think my dual goals are, on the one hand, to serve my clients in that social justice work that we do, but also mentor students, for them to become ethical lawyers, committed to social justice. And we define the work of the clinic very broadly, right? And I think by doing so, by defining the scope of our work broadly, students and I have been able to work on many cases and projects, whether it's litigation, advocacy, policy issues in the US, Latin America, and abroad, at the UN, at the OAS. We've been able to cover a lot of different issues, such as violence against women is an issue that the clinic has worked on a lot. We're actually trying to get a new treaty passed on violence against women. Issues of homelessness here in Santa Clara County as well, with Professor Sloss. Issues of corporate accountability, which you wouldn't associate a human rights clinic working on corporate accountability. We've actually had 5 or 6 different projects on those issues. Issues of racism and police violence. In fact, I'm happy to say that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights granted a hearing that we requested along with the National Human Rights Program of the ACLU, the Center for Justice and Accountability, Howard University, and many other partners, Robert F. Kennedy. We have a broad national coalition to address the problems that we've been addressing throughout the summer in the United States. Other issues, LGBT rights, environmental issues, like dam that inundated an indigenous ancestral grounds in Belize. We worked on that, on human trafficking in the Bay Area, torture by the US abroad in Guantanamo, economic, social, and cultural rights, indigenous rights, labor rights. So we define it broadly, right? So I'm going to close by saying it's been fascinating for me to work on so many different aspects of social justice, or more broadly speaking, human rights issues every semester, particularly when we have such great committed students. So I hope all of you will reach out if you're interested in international human rights law as a way of advancing your own social justice goals. Bring them to me and we'll work something out. We'll create a new project. Thank you.